We've identified key signatures as part of the basic anatomy of a page of printed music, and we've said that they are symbols that you'll find at the beginning of the staff that tell you what key the piece of music is in. Beyond that, however, we haven't really gone into much detail about how they work. So today we move to the next step and learn how to use key signatures to determine where do is placed on the staff, which is going to be really valuable because once you know where do is placed, you can also find out what your starting pitch will be, and that's going to be really helpful in sight reading and on the music that we're learning in class. Before we break that skill down though, let's review something that's going to come in handy in just a moment. Remember that when we're placing notes on the 5 lines and 4 spaces of the staff, we alternate as we go up or down consecutively between line notes, which we describe as being on the line, and space notes, which we describe as being in the space. So when you look at a line note, you can see that the line runs straight through the center of that note head, so you can see that that note is squarely on that line. And so we call them on the line, and if we wanted to get specific, we could describe the bottom note here, for example, as being on the first line, or the top note here as being on the 5th line, and so on and so forth. When we look at space notes, we see that they are in the space because the note head is surrounded by space. That note is kind of floating in the space between those lines, and so we say that these notes are in the space. And I could describe one of these notes as being in the 2nd space or in the 4th space, for example, depending on which note I was describing. It's important that you maintain that distinction between on the line and in the space. It's also important that you be able to identify specifically and with precision exactly where a note is so that you can look at it and say, okay, that note is on the 1st line, or that note is in the 3rd space. That's going to be really important in a moment. Now let's get back to key signatures, and let me present a couple of basic facts that you need to know right up front. When you look at a key signature on the page, what you're going to see is a group of sharps or flats. And what that group of sharps or flats tells you is what key the piece of music is in, which is a decision made by the composer or the arranger or sometimes even the performer. Different pieces of music can be in different keys depending on what note is established as the main note, or do. So I could sing the song Mary Had a Little Lamb in this key. Mary had a little lamb whose fleece was white as snow. And that note would be our do. That's our main note for that key. I could also sing it in a much higher key. Mary had a little lamb whose fleece was white as snow. And in that case, do, that would be our main note for that key. So the key signature is what's going to tell us what our key is, where do is placed, and then we can figure out what our starting pitch will be. On your worksheet, the first paragraph describes these basic details that I've just covered, and you can see that there are blanks all the way through that paragraph. Take a moment now to look back at the information on the slide and fill in those blanks, and make sure you take your time and get it all correct so your notes are complete and accurate. In fact, I'd recommend that you press pause and take your time making sure everything's correct, and then you can press play and move on. Take a minute to do that now. Okay, your worksheet should be filled in. You're ready to move on. As I described before, key signatures consist of sharps or flats, but you'll never see them together in the same key signature. The key signature will be either all sharps or all flats, no matter what. Let's start with sharp key signatures. Here is an example of a sharp key signature. You can see the 4 sharps there next to the treble clef. You could have anywhere from 1 sharp to 7 sharps in a key signature, depending on the key. Here in this example, we're working with 4 sharps. Also, this is where we connect back to what we reviewed just a moment ago. Sharps can be written on the line, where the line runs through the center of the sharp, and you can see that this example sharp is written on the 5th line. Or sharps can be written in the space, and you can see the space that surrounds the center of that sharp. So that sharp is written in the space. In fact, it's written in the 3rd space in that particular example. Make sure that you're looking carefully for where sharps are placed, because that's going to be really important in understanding what these key signatures are telling us. Back to the key signature. You can see that the sharps are laid out in a sort of zigzag pattern, but the sharp that we're most concerned with is the last sharp. How do we know that's the last sharp? Because it's the furthest one to the right, just as the last letter of a word is the furthest letter to the right. So the last letter of the word is D, and you can tell that when you look at the page because it's furthest to the right. Same thing with sharps. Don't get confused and think that it has to do anything with up and down. It does not. It's whichever sharp is furthest to the right. Once you know that, that's valuable because the last sharp in any sharp key signature is on the same line or space as the solfege syllable T. So wherever that last sharp is placed is also where T will be placed. In this case, that last sharp is on the fourth line, so T will also be on that fourth line. Once you know that, you can figure out where the other notes are, either by working down, so stepping down to La, and then So, and then Fa, and then Mi, and then Re, and then our main note Do. Notice that we're alternating space, line, like we always do. If you don't do that, your count's going to be off, so be careful. Or, to find Do quickly, all we have to do is step up, in this case, to the next space right above it, and there's the higher Do that's at the top of the scale. Which way you work from T is going to be dependent on your situation. Sometimes you'll want to move your way down. Sometimes you'll want to go quickly up to that Do that's just right on top. It just depends. So that's really all there is to understanding a sharp key signature at this point. So let's review those steps that we just established. You'll see that your sharp key signature is laid out in the zigzag pattern, but you're looking for the last sharp, which is furthest to the right. Once you know where that last sharp is, then you know where T is because it will be on the same line or space where that last sharp is placed. Once you know where T is, you can either work your way down or you can work your way up to find the notes of the scale. Looking back at your worksheet, now if you'll look at the second paragraph, that is the paragraph that describes the procedure for sharp key signatures. Take a moment now and fill in those blanks and take your time. Make sure that your notes are complete and accurate. That takes care of sharp key signatures. Now let's talk about flat key signatures. Here's an example of a flat key signature. This key signature has 3 flats. You could have anywhere from 1 to 7 flats. Same deal as the sharps. It just depends on the key. Here we're working with 3 flats. And you can see that some flats are written on the line. You can see the line running through the center of the flat. That flat is written on the third line. Some flats are written in the space. This particular flat is written in the second space. Make sure you're looking carefully for where these flats are placed. So once again, you'll see the zigzag pattern of the flats, and once again, you're looking for the last flat, which will be furthest to the right. Flat key signatures do work a little differently from sharp key signatures. The last flat is going to be the solfege syllable Fa. That's easier to remember though because flat and Fa begin with the same letter, so hopefully you won't forget that. Once you know where that last flat is, you found where Fa will be placed. In this case, the last flat is written in the second space, so Fa is written there as well. And once you know where Fa is, you can either work your way down to Mi, and then Re, and then our main note Do, or you can work your way up to So, and La, and Ti, and then our main note Do at the top of the scale. That's really all there is to flat key signatures. Pretty simple as well. Let's review quickly those steps we just established. Once again, you're expecting to see the flats laid out in a zigzag pattern, but you're looking for the last flat, which is furthest to the right. Once you know where that last flat is, that line or space will also be the line or space for Fa. You can work your way down to find the rest of the notes going down, or you can work your way up to find the rest of the pitches going up. Depends on the situation which you'll choose to do. On your worksheet, once again, the third paragraph now is the paragraph that describes the procedure for flat key signatures. Take a moment, fill in those blanks, make sure that everything on your notes is accurate and complete so that you'll have this when you need to study over it later. That takes care of sharp key signatures and flat key signatures. But what if you see neither flats nor sharps in a key signature? What, for example, if you see this? Don't be fooled. There is a key signature here. This is not no key signature. This is just the key signature that has no sharps or flats. It's kind of an exception to the rule, but it's still a key signature. And for this one, you just have to memorize. When there are no sharps or flats in the key signature, in the treble clef at least, do will be on the first ledger line below the staff. And that's something you just have to memorize because you can't use sharps or flats as a guide in this case. Just know when the key signature has no sharps or flats, do is on the first line below the staff. This is also covered on your worksheet in the fourth paragraph, which is very brief. 2 quick blanks to fill in there, but make sure you've got them so that your notes are accurate and complete. Before we finish up with this lesson, let's just review the things that we've been over, starting with sharp key signatures. So remember, when you're working with a sharp key signature, you're looking for the last sharp, which is furthest to the right. It will be on the same line or space as the solfege syllable T. Once you know where T is, you can work your way down or up to do or to any of the notes in between. If we're talking about a flat key signature, once again we're looking for the last flat. For flat key signatures, that last flat will be Fa, and once you know where Fa is, then you can work up or down to find the rest of the notes of the scale. If you have no sharps and no flats, that's the exception to the rule, and you just have to memorize that in that situation, in the treble clef, do is placed on the first ledger line below the staff. Just have to memorize that one as an exception to the rule. The last thing on your worksheet, you'll see at the bottom, there are 6 key signatures in which you're asked to identify where do is placed. It says we'll do those as a class, and we will review them as a class, but I do want you to go ahead and complete them right now so that you get some practice. Eventually, with enough practice, you won't have to go through all the steps of finding the last sharp, counting down to where do is, or finding the last flat, and so on and so forth. Eventually, you'll be so familiar with these key signatures that you will see a key signature and know exactly where do is placed. But you can't get there unless you do good practice. So there are only 6 problems there at the bottom. Take your time with them. Make sure you're getting it right and following all the steps on each of them so that you can build that foundation for becoming really familiar with these key signatures. If there's something that you missed or something that sort of went over your head as you were watching the the beauty of the video is now you can go back and rewind and watch that section again and again if you like. So take your time, do that. If there's something that you missed, go back and watch again and see if that helps. If after doing that you're still confused, that's okay too. Just make sure you write your question down so that when you're back in class, we can go over it and make sure we clear up any confusion that you might have.